those require me to be a little bit more judicious in my thought process. And so when I say to people that I'm well, it is because I'm constantly seeking that wellness. And I do that with the emphasis on joy, not happiness, on joy.
Our ever-changing world calls upon the most courageous, resilient, and relentless of us to face its most extraordinary challenges. To help you embark on this journey, we present the Impactful Coaching Podcast, your oasis for inspiration and a beacon to spark the fires of greatness within you. I'm Joseph. I will be your ally in this journey to empower your potential. Join us each week as we dive deep into the heart of ambition, drive, and success to unravel compelling stories of daring leaders who dreamed, struggled, and achieved victory. Our journey begins now. How is everybody doing? This is the Impactful Coaching Podcast. Sit down, relax, unless you're doing something, in which case, do what you're doing. Happy to accompany you on your travels, your vacuuming, assuming that your vacuum is balanced out so that you can hear what I'm saying. Trust me, I've tried to vacuum while listening to podcasts. It doesn't go on very well. I'm here today with Michael S. Parker of ForgePT.com. Michael, how are you doing today? How are you feeling?
Doing great. I'm usually feeling quite well.
Okay, not to start off on a tangent, but what does like the not usually feel like for you?
I would say that's when the circumstances of life challenge me in ways that I maybe did not expect or plan for. And I have to have the agility mentally, emotionally, and physically to meet the demand of life.
Mm-hmm.
I find that conscientiousness related to decision making is really important, especially in a world where we're just bombarded with so much and we're overstimulated. So whenever I get that way, I stop. I just take a break, step back, and I go through my whole process and I say, okay, all right, why am I feeling this way, whatever that feeling is? And then what I do is I try and encapsulate that feeling so that I can manage it, so that the outcome of the instigation of that feeling is positive, or at least in my favor, in the favor of the situation. And I don't think that we're very good at doing that as a society in general,
Yeah.
but I do my best. Now, I'm not perfect at it, and I write about this quite a bit. And a lot of my content that I produce is all around mindset when you're antagonized. So for me, to answer your question more directly, is I think outside of like a physical illness, which is very rare for me, it can sometimes just be the circumstances of life, as I had mentioned. Usually the things that really kind of get me a little off my game are things that are beyond my control, like where the universe kind of collapses. For example, deaths in the family, things of that nature. Those require me to be a little bit more judicious in my thought process. And so when I say to people that I'm well, it is because I'm constantly seeking that wellness. And I do that with the emphasis on joy, not happiness, on joy. I seek joy as a state, right? Because happiness is just another feeling. And I feel that that's really, really been helpful for me. I have historically, since I was a young man, struggled with feelings of great depression, not like anything that would be considered like clinically concerning, but just like every human being, I'm met with adversity and I have to make a decision as to how I'm going to deal with it. So if I seek joy, I'm conscious about my decision making, I'm doing pretty damn well.
I have to say, I really appreciate the answer. And for the record, I don't initially question people whenever they say that, but because the through line of today's episode is about fitness and is about health and wellness, it was just something that I wanted to hear, especially from you. One thing that I started adopting very recently to help me when I feel that way, or when I start to feel like a lot of my anxiety tends to come from personal issues rather than large-scale holistic issues. You know, I can be I'm focused, all day today on working on my business and my platform. But if there's something personal that comes up to scale, it's not as like it's just not as important holistically, but it's just so impactful to me. And a lot of that anxiety comes from not knowing what it's going to turn out to be, if it's going to turn into something much bigger, if it's going to be a problem that now I have to put more energy into. And my body is telling me, you are so much more valuable. You have so many more important things that you have to deal with. And so that stress almost comes from like a sense of dissatisfaction with the things that are causing me problems. It's like, I deserve better problems than this. So what I started doing is I started using ChatGPT as a touch point, as a form of
Mhm.
personal journaling, and as a form of therapy. So
Yeah.
I was recommended journaling for a long time, but I never quite appreciated the apparatus until I started using ChatGPT just to have something talk back to me. Now, I've had maybe like 10 conversations with it in this way, and I can kind of tell what it's going to say. It always starts off with, it's understandable that you feel this way. Here are 10 things that you can do
Information.
to start feeling better. You should look into cognitive behavior therapy. I'm like, okay, I can
Yeah.
predict 90% of what it's going to say now, but just saying it moves a needle in the right direction. And so that's something that I just wanted to exchange with you in relation to what I had just asked.
I think that's great. And journaling, by the way, is something that I encourage folks who are predispositioned to do that to follow through on. It doesn't work for everybody I've experienced, but it works for a majority of folks because it allows you to kind of quantify what you're having to contend with. And when you can kind of put it out there and then you can get it fed back to you, it allows you to resolve it a lot faster. And that's just what I've noticed, at least working with thousands of people over the last 24 years.
Well, with that, I think now would be the perfect time to introduce you to our audience. And so, first question, it's a staple of the podcasting world. It's just one of those things that's just got to be asked. But would you care to tell the audience what you do and what you're up to these days?
That's not a problem. So obviously, I'm the CEO and founder of Forge Fitness and Nutrition Coaching. We're an online coaching organization, and we focus on creating an environment which people can come and find sustainability in their fitness, their nutrition, their general overall wellness to whatever degree of scope of practice we fit into, all with the idea that it comes down to habit and your mindset. It's all about attitude. So we work with attitude first because we can write you the best fitness and nutrition program in the world, but if you don't do it or if you're resentful towards it, it's not going to work. So we have to work on behavior first. I've been doing that for about 7 years now. Forge is grand open on January 1st, 2017. So we're in our seventh year. We now operate in over 60 countries. We work with thousands of people. We have some incredible coaches. They're all highly credentialed. And it's something that I could never consider doing. I can't even consider doing anything else at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before that, previously, I was in executive management in the fitness industry, CEO, vice president of some of the largest fitness companies in the world. And then before that, I just started as a salesperson and personal trainer at a 24-hour fitness in Fremont, California, back in like 2001. And so I've gone through the entire process and I've gone through, 2 decades of change, societal change, the impact of social media, just the way that people think and the way that the environments have changed, the way that the fitness industry has changed, large mega clubs to boutique, all those kinds of things I've had the privilege of experiencing in my career. And I think that what happened was in 2007, I realized that the fitness and nutrition industry was missing a huge component, and it was on mindset coaching, right? And so in 2016, I came up with the concept for Forge and we launched it January 1st, 2017. We've been doing great.
Now, one of the things that I like to discover about people as I do, the little bit of research that I do before entering into the conversation is just to see if there was a prior industry or a line of work that was not directly connected to it. But, my impression from what you've told me and from what I've seen is that fitness and health and wellness and all of this was really been your life's focus. So, were you dabbling in any other industries or any other lines of work prior to this, or what was the spark of inspiration that made this such a significant commitment for your life?
It's a great question.
Thank you.
I write about this quite a bit in my book because it was the basis for my decisions and my ethos, my code of ethics as it related to how I was going to conduct my coaching company. Before this, I did what every other teenager and somebody in their early 20s did, whatever the hell I could. In the late 90s and early 2000s, I'm 45 this year. And I started doing this when I was in my 20s, like 21. So it's been a long journey, and my entire adult life has been immersed in the fitness and nutrition space. In fact, I was even a college teacher for 10 years at Bryan University for the Advanced Fitness and Nutrition Science program. I even helped write the curriculum. I was on the advisory committee before I did that. But before all of the fitness and nutrition and wellness stuff became part of my life, I like any other teenager. Well, back then it was different. You know, we could get a work permit at age 14 in the 90s. And I started at, of all things, a retail store. There was nothing else that would hire me as a young man, and I was almost on my own. I have a really interesting upbringing. So at 14 years of age, I was expected to provide, or at least assist in provisions for the family. And then I went to another retail store, so I only worked at two. And then at the time, one of my really close friends, my mentor, who got me into the fitness industry, said, you know, maybe you should look at getting into fitness. And I considered it, and I went in and I spoke with him. And I think it was somewhere, I don't remember the exact date, but it had to have been in the middle of 2001. I got hired, and the rest is history. So outside of retail, fitness the whole time.
I will say it's just it's not something that I see as much of in aggregate because a lot of the people that I talk to usually come into their own at certain points. We see a lot of people who've pivoted where they've been committed to certain industries for 10, 15, 20 years. And it's not like it's a loss or anything like that. It's about the transmutation and how one thing transmutes into another. So it's admirable to see that level of commitment, and that same transmutation is more about how you've approached the industry, and it's more about how you've been able to serve others and more to scale now, as opposed to maybe just doing like one-on-one coaching with particular clients and sort of that more like boutique white glove hands-on approach, which by the way, because I've seen that you still do work directly with people for people who want to sign up for the 90-day habit coaching. So
Mhm.
that word, that's the key word of the day is habits. So I have
Yeah.
fun with this question. I don't ask this because I expect people to be the arbiter of truth, but I just think it's a cool question to ask, which is let's just say Webster's dictionary or Wikipedia calls you and says, we need you to define habits. What do you say to them?
Habits are a set of almost instinctual and ingrained behaviors that are typically rooted in the pursuance of pleasure or the avoidance of pain. We create habits as efficiency adaptations. We are always looking both emotionally or psychologically, I should say, and physically to meet any adaptation from internal and external environments. Habits are simply the byproduct of efficiency, whether they're good or bad. So the mind can create wonderful habit efficiencies and very negative habit efficiencies. We have very, very high functioning folks who almost have everything dialed in their life. They're an alcoholic. You know, we have people who are very focused in their brain, have excellent habits as it relates to their nutrition, and maybe they're very focused on their careers and their family, but they're terrible at exercise. So physiologically, their habits aren't necessarily optimal, and then they're suffering consequences because of that. So habit really is a set of automated systems designed to create speed in decision making, or at least the absence of the thought of the decision. The decision's already been made.
Mm-hmm.
What my goal has always been is to override those habits with positive habits. Any destructive habit has to be overwritten deliberately. Replace that habit so that you can actually make behavioral change. So I define habits as a series of automations that are rooted in those components.
The main through line that has come up over the course of a lot of episodes is the tension between the younger that we are, the more our habits may become firmly rooted, they're easier to imprint, and then the older we get and the more wisdom we accumulate, the more we realize the importance of ironing out those habits, or as you say, replacing destructive ones with positive, productive ones, but it becomes more difficult to do. So if I were asked this question that I'm about to ask you, which is what are there advantages to working out your habits later in life? For me, is being able to have more of that knowledge and that understanding of why it's so important to do. A lot of the why is lost on younger generations, as kids' job is to ask questions and to be curious, but a lot of times it's just a matter of being told what to do. It's unfortunate. So are there distinct advantages to trying to deal with habits later on in life that are not inherently obvious, or is it a matter of the best day to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best day is right now?
I think that that is highly personal and
Mm-hmm.
it depends on that individual. But in general, I would say that young people approach life a little more recklessly because they don't know. There's an unconscious incompetence that young people tend to have, and they allow habits that could potentially be destructive long term to manifest because they don't understand the consequences, or they don't think that the consequences are going to happen, or that they'll be able to fix it in time, you know? So I think that there's an arrogance that comes with youth that's just natural. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. However, as you get older, I think that you have more ownership of your habits, or at least you should, because you use the word wisdom, and that's something that I use quite frequently. It's a very, very powerful word, because wisdom is not knowledge, it's the application of experience and knowledge combined. And if you are older and you recognize that you have destructive habits or behaviors in your life, and you willfully disregard the opportunity to change, because it's usually a fear. I call these habit resistances. I have a whole chapter on this in my book. And when you're older and you have the experience and the knowledge and you willfully choose not to make change, there's really no excuse for that. You know, you can kind of forgive the ignorance of youth. They don't have the experience, but when you get older, and when I say older, I'm talking 25 and up,
Mhm.
right? Because we keep changing the bar of what an adult is. I mean, only in certain subsets, right? So I remember when I was growing up, 16 was an adult. Like you had to have your stuff together, and you had to have your life focused. You had to know what you were doing, and you probably had to be out of the house,
Yeah.
right? And then it turned to 18. And in my generation, 18, Gen X was 18 was like that's when everybody moved out. And that was true. Most people really did. It was a different time. But now got people living with their parents in their 30s. We don't need to go into all that and why that is, and all that stuff. But what it does mean is that it's changed the way that people behave, because their environments and the instigators that can create habit are so varied nowadays. It's very difficult to kind of wrangle that in and quantify it. But I will tell you that on the surface, in general, if somebody is aware and conscious, it transcends age. It doesn't matter how old you are. And do I think it's harder for an older person or a younger person? No, I think it's based on your personality. It could be your environment, it could be your culture, it could be your religious influence. There are so many variables that, in order for me to quantify that, I don't think that it would be reasonable. That's what's interesting. We should at some point talk about the process of, well, the concept of accountability, because that would probably further answer that question.
Okay. The illuminating side of it is recognizing that age is one factor, but there are numerous other factors. As you say, there's culture and there's upbringing, and then there is the holistic societal issues. Now, I myself, I like being transparent on the show. I'm 34 years old, and while I was previously living with my partner for about 3 years, we had a loss in the family over the course of the summer. My father-in-law, her father, passed away, and so we agreed, are we going to be saving a large sum of money by doing this? Yes, but also it just made sense to go live with the mother as opposed to leaving her on her own in an empty house. So somewhat circumstance, but the
Totally
silver lining
reasonable.
was, yeah, exactly. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of these stories are similar. Because I think that there are, of course, I feel like I can make a point just by saying inflation without having to follow up with anything like that. But the cost of housing, and a side point, and then I want to follow up on the accountability because I want to hear about that. But a side point that I'm picking up on is the rebellious attitude towards our own well being as a way of pushing back against societal norms. Is people who get into their 30s and their 40s and their 50s continue to smoke copious amounts, continue to drink to excess, continue to do all sorts of poor things. The wisdom has turned into almost a form of nihilism, where now it's an act of, yeah, rebelliousness against a society that people have become disenfranchised or become embittered towards and don't want to participate in.
I agree to a point. I also think that there is a new hybrid of thought process in the Western world, and it is the absence of personal responsibility. You see this in the obesity epidemic. 7 out of 10 Americans are overfat. Nearly 5 out of 10
Mm-hmm.
Americans are morbidly, clinically, medically compromised because of obesity. The number one killer in this country is heart disease, and it is directly linked to obesity, and then diabetes follows. These are things that are completely preventable. But what we do now is we blame. It's always somebody else's problem. And if it's not someone else's problem, it's your genetics. Rubbish. It's all rubbish. So now we have these surgence of movements, body positivity, and other things. Now, don't get me wrong. I do make a note about the body positivity movement in my book, and I'll make that note here just because everybody's so eager to cancel if they disagree with you. I don't really care, but you can't cancel truth. You could try,
Mhm.
but you can't. So what it really comes down to is people are no longer willing to accept that they are the problem. Everyone else is the problem. And on the back of that, the word accountability gets thrown around like crazy, but I don't think anybody really knows what it means anymore.
Okay, so what I would say is, where do you think is the extent of personal accountability, and then where do you think it is fair to empathize with the disenfranchisement that someone might withstand? And I know you work globally, but we're having a pretty much a North American conversation here so far.
Sure.
So yeah, so where do you think people? Where do you not blame people for the stuff that they've had to deal with, versus where do you feel people do need to take accountability?
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you mean by disenfranchised, and then that will help me frame the answer.
I would characterize it as the frustration as a but for a lot of people it gets a lot worse, the contempt towards the relationship between how much energy people are putting in, especially in say the workplace, versus what they're getting out of that energy. So for a lot of people, and again I say inflation, but that's something that is actually affecting people on their bottom lines, is say for instance, if I'm working for someone and I don't raise my rates for years and years and years, what is happening is my input is gradually giving me less return for it than my output. And a lot of people are facing this. A lot of people are facing entry level positions, working for minimum wage, and are over time either getting slight raises and have not gained the financial literacy to understand how to properly use their money, how to properly manage their money, which is the part that you can ask them to take accountability for. But just the feel that the governments are failing them, the feeling that our entertainment is failing us because entertainment seems to have a little more interest in pushing a message rather than taking us out of the society where we're faced with messages, inundated with messages nonstop, and instead to actually enjoy some passive entertainment. People don't know where to turn to for a lot of this. People don't know where to turn to for wisdom. The polarization of politics, the fact that you can vote for one side and half the country will hate you. I mean, it's one thing to disagree with it, but to be outright hated for it. And you notice I'm being vague because it doesn't matter. If you lean right, you're going to hate the left. If you lean left, you're going to hate the right. So I hope that gives you enough context for where I think the disenfranchisement comes with. But if I had to pick one lane and stick to it, I would definitely say it's the economic problem of just working people. They're working harder and they're getting less for it.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, so I'll make this very brief. Everything that you said is probably true in a lot of areas, and it always has been, and it always will be. It's not going to change. Human nature is never going to really change. Now, we've come a long way, but I think that it's very important that we contextualize this. Are we better off as a society in general, despite what the media tells us, and despite what the inflation numbers are currently, than we were 100 years ago? Is there less disease? And I'm talking about mortality disease. I'm not talking about the ones that we make up. I'm talking about real disease. The disease could be all kinds of things back then. It's like half of the diseases we used to die from don't even exist anymore. It could be the fact that most people died of starvation 100 years ago. We didn't have grocery stores. We didn't have, most people didn't even have telephones. Very few people did 100 years ago. We have fundamentally changed. So, what we have to do is be objective about the fact that there is going to be pain in our lives. There are going to be detractors from our objectives. There are going to be external influences that we don't necessarily control. They can be governmental, they can be environmental, they can be family, they can be friends, they can be our work environment, they could be our bad choices, it could be our neighborhoods. Those things can somewhat be controlled, but not really. at the end of the day, none of it really matters when you pare it down to your individual desires and goals for your life. You get to decide how much quality in life and what is your attitude about that. If you're really, really feeling disenfranchised, assess where that's coming from and then change it for yourself. Now, I know that that's a very abstract thing to say because sometimes there are conditions which exclude that as an option. I understand that. I'm using a broadsword here when this is actually the kind of conversation that would probably take hours or days and require scalpels.
Mm-hmm.
But just in the interest of time and also just, to not be too controversial, I do believe that everybody at the end of the day, at least in the United States, as we're talking about North America, really doesn't understand pain. Most people in general only understand discomfort because they've really not experienced true pain outside of the normal life circumstances. Yes, it does concern me how the government behaves. I am concerned about our economic climate. I am concerned about the well-being of the financial situation of most Americans. Absolutely. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but you don't have to be poor and have bad
Mm-hmm.
habits. You don't have to be rich and have bad habits. It doesn't matter. It kind of transcends economy. It transcends class, if you want to start using those words, which I don't particularly care for. I think they're divisive. And that's one of the things that I really start to find myself becoming agitated with in our society is the intention of division. And I think that that's where we start to fail as a society. Remember how I said 100 years ago we had it worse? We keep on this path, we'll have it worse again. United, we stand. Divided, we fall. And that's not just a trope,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you take one little stick and you bend it, it'll break. But you take 10 of those little sticks and you put them together and you try and bend it, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
It's not breaking. Community matters. And we've lost our way on that. And I think that's why we're seeing a reemergence of tribalism. And I don't think that that's particularly good for us as a society. I think that inclusion is a really positive, proactive direction as a society. But that doesn't mean that everybody will choose to be included. There are going to be people who choose to exclude themselves and or use some other mechanism as a means to as why they are not where they should be. I have never in my 20 something year career ever met somebody who is obese that was happy about it. Oh, they'll lie on social media, and that's what it is. I'll be very direct. It's a lie. I do not know one single obese person that is happy that they're obese when they're honest. Now, yeah, like I said, they'll post on social media about it, but you'll see it on TikTok, and the people are so happy about that. In fact, the top 10 body positivity TikTokers are dead from last year. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I
It
wasn't aware of that.
transcends all that, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. The summit's, I think, is I don't know any of their names. I don't have TikTok. I didn't, my social media is not my thing. I have been really emphasizing creating quality content for our Instagram and YouTube. So that's going to be blowing up here soon. As a matter of fact, we've been producing a lot more habit-based wellness, consciousness, and fitness and nutrition content, and we're getting a lot of traction on that stuff recently. You know what it is? It's because we're not trying to sell something. We're just educators, you know? And if you can show people that it's simple, it's just not easy, then you're going to find more people willing to give it a go. But I want to come back to something that you had said. And I know that what we did here was we went down a very broad avenue there. So it's kind of hard to like, kind of pinpoint that down. But there's one concept that I wanted to kind of follow up on. If we focus on the negative, we're going to get the negative. If we focus on positive, we're going to find positive solutions. That's a general that's a general truth for at least Americans. I'm not talking about I hate when people do this. This is what everybody does nowadays, especially in social media. You say something in general, and then they'll take a substrata, a fraction of a percent of a group, and they'll say, well, what about this? And they throw it at you like they had made some like
Mm-hmm.
like stellar debate point, and you're just like, oh God, jeez.
Yeah, yeah.
No, let's talk about this in the broad sense here, because what we're not trying to solve world hunger here. What we're trying to do is have, let's have the best life that we possibly can, right? Let's all have the best positive habits. Let's have a great outcome, a joyful existence. Let's be well, and in whatever socioeconomic class you're in is irrelevant. That's my goal. That's why Forge transcends borders. We operate in over 60 countries. And that was the goal. I wanted to do that. I wanted to be able to affordably deliver high level fitness, nutrition, and behavior based coaching without having to worry about being in one little city and creating my own little community. Like our client retention is insane. IRSA, International Racket Sports Health Club Association, is our trade industry in the fitness world. And they were doing some studies about retention, both in fitness clubs, and they've done some work on online coaching and stuff like that. We don't have a lot of data on that yet because it's relatively new. Forge is actually one of the oldest out there. Well, I mean, not the oldest, but we are one of the elder online companies. Like most of these thousands of these online fitness companies that popped up did during COVID because trainers lost their jobs and they scrambled, right? But it all transcends that class, and it's about transcending border and economic status and trying to create accessibility to real professional coaching so you can make better decisions about how you want to run your life as it relates to your well-being. That's all we really want at the end of the day. So that was a long-winded broadsword there for you.
Well, it's just what I actually prefer to do. I believe that this is about giving people the opportunity to think out loud and explore these subjects.
That's
I
the way
don't
to do
want
it.
to. I try to be as diplomatic as possible, so I don't want to take a dump on somebody
Disinterrupt.
else's show. But I'm sure there's going to be other shows where people are going to ask you 20 questions and you give 20 answers. So they're out there, but this is what I like to do. Now, I just earlier today I was reviewing an episode that up until now is not released, but it was with Dr. Sherry Price, and
Oh yeah.
that episode was about largely alcohol consumption, but alcohol can be substituted for other things that people are dealing with. And one of the things that I came to as a conclusion was the issue with the demonization of it. Now, if someone has an extreme problem, then it calls for an extreme solution. But a lot of other people look at those extreme solutions thinking that's what they have to do. And this demonization process is giving it power, which just ends up leading people to either consume it to this level that they found problematic or do more of it. Now, that's not the question, but I'll pause for a second in case you did want to make a point about it.
I don't believe that there is any inherent value or utility from a coach's perspective to shame.
Mhm.
Now,
And that was also mentioned too on the show, is the
yeah,
idea of shaming is just going to make people relapse or regress into it.
that doesn't excuse a coach for not being honest and direct with considerate compassion and empathy towards that particular client's needs. And that depends a lot on the client coach relationship too.
I appreciate all of that, and the reason why I wanted to pause this is because we're talking about something that could be harmful to people, and so to speak to someone who prioritizes health, I felt like I should give him a chance to just weigh in on that before I proceed. But what I came to, and this is the first time that I've heard this term. I don't know if it somebody else's, but I just thought of it as I was putting this episode together. Is the opposite of demonization, which is angelization. It's taking practices or habits that seem too good for someone to chase after. And that's what I wanted to ask you about is the what you teach people and what you work with. Do you encounter people who feel like they're not able to do it or they're not good enough for it or that they need to like what how do you go through someone's head and help them understand what it is that they can actually do to start treating fitness with the respect that you treat it with?
Yes, we deal with that all the time. One of the biggest challenges that I think that Americans particularly are contending with is the fear of failure. They
Mm-hmm.
have tried so many different diets. They've tried pills, they've tried gyms, they've tried programs, programs and templates and all this other stuff. Their friend said this diet's great and they do it. And there's so much failure that we are stuck in this cycle. But the problem is that nobody is willing to address or don't know that they need to address their actual behaviors, the root cause behaviors. I think that the angelization as you say, of habits might be an oscillation off of the demonization of habits and maybe not necessarily constructive because it creates an enablement. You start to entitle people, or you give them an opportunity to feel like they can excuse themselves. That is what I said earlier. I think that's abdication. I think that abdicates responsibility. I think both do. But angelization might be slightly more harmful in that regard because you're basically giving them permission or validating their bad behavior on accident. You have to be very careful about that.
Because as we go through our upcoming generations, technology has made it easier for made it perhaps too easy. No, not perhaps. It's made it too easy for us to experience gratification, and so you struggle with this idea of something that is going to produce results if you stick to it, but the difference between those results and the tangible results of checking social media or playing games or doing anything that can lead to immediate gratification is a challenge. So here's the way I'm going to ask it, but we'll see where we go with this. Is what is some of the most common positive feedback, positive reinforcement that people are experiencing when they start committing to these plans? Are there any results that people can see maybe a day later or 2 days later or even on the same day? Is that possible?
Yes, there are several things that you can identify quite quickly when you are starting to make behavioral change. The first one is it's uncomfortable. The second is that once you decide what you're going to do with that discomfort, you now know your character. You get to decide. That's the beauty of habits is it's individual. It's your personal issues. Nobody gets to tell you. I mean, people can guide you, they can mentor, they can coach, they can do all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the onus is on the individual. They have to make the decision to change. So the first thing they're going to notice is that they're out of homeostasis. And people don't like being out of homeostasis. Genetically, we don't like being out of homeostasis. Homeostasis is simply the stability of environments. That's sociological, physiological, psychological, environmental. We really like stability as a species. It's very important to us. When you are taken out of homeostasis, you get a fear trigger. And that fear trigger is a variety of different triggers, but I'm going to use one that you used earlier, which is fearing that you're going to put out too much and not get enough in return,
Mm-hmm.
right? So is there equity in the change? Because here's the reality about people, and this is crazy, but we all know this is true. Anybody who sees or listens to this knows this is true. We would rather maintain the fear that we know, even if it's destructive, versus changing, getting a new pain and a new fear set that we don't understand and we don't know. We'd rather maintain destructive homeostasis, even if the potential for improvement is there, but pain could follow or be part of that change. That right there is an inhibitor. It stops people from taking action. That can be a real problem for folks, you know? But I think that one of the things that we try in coaching is to get people to stabilize and understand that change is slow and habit change is particularly slow and quitting will not speed it up. It's still going to be slow. So coming back to the concept of instant gratification, this is one of my platforms. I talk about this. We are a society of instant gratification. So if you think for a second that you're going to do one workout and you're going to be a figure model, you're just being delusional. Come on, let's be smart. So let me circle back around and answer your question very directly. There are several positive changes that you will notice from starting a workout program, from changing up your diet to be more healthy, and I can give you some examples of what that would look like, and making some changes on your behavior. The first is when you are triggered towards or instigated. I like to use the word instigated because we use the word triggered so much it's getting obnoxious. Everybody's triggered all the time. Oh, geez, come on, people. Don't be so weak. It's so frustrating. You can't make change if you're weak. And that weakness is yours. You own that weakness. You have to be strong internally. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic. We can get to that. So we can do an hour on that. But
I didn't check, but do you have a
um,
podcast?
I don't.
You don't?
But we're
Okay.
working on.
Okay.
But I'm not because I want to get on the podcast game. It's because I want to add value to my clients. So Coming back to what I was going to say as it relates to those immediate changes that you should identify, you should be aware of, you should be paying attention to make sure that you're in tune with what you're trying to accomplish. There is something profoundly unique when you receive an instigator, you recognize that instigator, and you choose not to follow your habitual pattern. Your self-esteem goes up immediately. Your sense of centered self gets a little bump in the meter. Like, let's just make an anecdotal meter, right? Here's rock bottom in life. Here you're top of the world, right? And maybe this is where you are. You feel mediocre. You're just feeling like you're not yourself. You're not your best version, right? But you get a little tick every time you make a small little decision, and that can add up relatively quickly. But it's hard because you have to be willing to accept it and acknowledge that you are making improvement despite the fact that it's uncomfortable and you're not getting the satisfaction and the instant gratification of the behavior you're trying to thwart. Smoking a cigarette, drinking some alcohol, eating processed foods, having an ice cream. Well, I don't know. You insert it there. Like, we could probably come up with in your comment section, people could probably come up with over 100 different triggers and instigators that we have to contend with throughout the day that are destructive that we want to change behavior towards. So you get a self-esteem boost right away. There's also something to be said about when you eat clean and you're well hydrated in just one day, you wake up the following day and you're like, I kind of feel a little bit better. Wellness is the process of accumulation, right? It's not something that you just do. And by the way, Americans, they love this. There's a giant problem with Americans on this. They try to buy their fitness. They'll enroll in a program, they'll buy a Peloton or whatever apparatus, and then that's it, man. They've made the decision. They are at their peak motivation. Their feelings were all in it, but they didn't have any discipline, and so they fail. So that ties me back to fitness failure or the process of wellness and habit-based failures. So those incremental changes over a period of days should be considered instant gratification. But guess what? The payoff isn't enough for most people. That's where we come back to your issue, right? There's not the equity, there's not the payoff. Like, imagine you buy a house for, I'm just going to make up numbers, $200,000. You live in it for 10 years and you go to sell it. But because your mortgage and your interest and all that stuff was there and the market is what it was, blah, blah, blah. But your equity on the house when you go to sell it after a decade is not even as much as what your down payment was. You're like, oh man, and then you suddenly say real estate's stupid or whatever it is, right? We have something that we'll go to, or you'll say maybe I made a bad decision where I chose to buy this house, but that's unlikely. If people can step back outside of that instant gratification and not fear disruption to homeostasis towards positive change, then we're going to see a lot more joyfulness in the process and that journey of habit change and becoming a better version of themselves and being well. There's my long-winded answer.
Well, I mean, it's podcasting. It's still long-winded format, so don't ever let me discourage you. Don't ever feel like you gotta shorten it, because I just feel like if people feel that they can only have like 10, 15, 20 seconds or a minute to answer a question, makes it harder for me to follow up, and I gotta like start rifling through other questions. It just feels more rapid fire. So, just something for everyone's sake is that the longer they go, I think the more value that it not only is producing inherently, but the more value that it can produce by creating new connections and associations. I wrote down the word dodgeball, and the reason why I wrote that down is because it was a movie. I forget like what it came out quite a few years ago, but what it
Ben
did is
Stiller, Vince Vaughn,
yeah
can't go wrong.
it,
Got to burn it to earn it, buddy.
that was sort of the origin of why I asked it about the demonization, angelization aspect of it, is because it created this sense of like elitism towards working out and fitness versus the average Joe's gym, which by the end of the movie, spoiler alert, had to go through a little bit of a renovation, but largely agree that, hey, everybody needs, you're beautiful the way you are, but come out, lose some weight, make some friends. And what I wanted to ask about is, we have different activities. Like I'm interested in swimming, which is probably the most conventional sport that I'm interested in. Everything else gets pretty alternative slash weird. Like I like combat sports like paintball or airsoft or Nerf. My
Cool.
partner and I would practice lightsaber dueling, and there's something joyful about
Oh,
right on.
totally.
I forgot to charge mine today. Anyways, there's something really joyful about chasing the activity and having the health and the fitness occur as a matter of happenstance. This is
Mhm.
a personal hang up for me that I wanted to ask you about, which is for people who enjoy going to the gym and enjoy going doing those direct workouts. What is a part of it that's is it just enjoyment for the enjoyment's sake of it, or how do you see that as an activity to find a satisfaction and joy in doing it the way I would enjoy swimming and also gain health and improve my physical form as a result, rather than just go directly for improving my physical form. I mean, it's called workout because work is the key term in it. So that's just something that's always bit of an issue for me. Like for me, it's not as fun to just go and pump iron.
I think I understand. Allow me to clarify.
Sure.
Are you asking me how can somebody in their mindset and their attitude approach working out or a gym with a positive mindset and not resentment because it feels structured and it's boring versus doing something that's highly active and slightly functional and has an enjoyment or nostalgia factor?
That's all pretty
The
good.
difference. Yeah.
The difference would be the interest in what the activity actually entails,
Uh-huh.
which is very clear for me with swimming, but it's not clear why I would be interested in working out because it's just the physical improvement and it's not a game. It's not something that I'm doing for the inherent fun of it.
I understand. The answer to that question is actually quite simple. We have a problem as a general society that we believe that exercise and fitness is about composition. It's about how you look. It's not. It shouldn't be, but it is. That's what the majority of the population is interested in is a aesthetic outcome. I'm going to tell you right now, that is not how you set goals. There's two types of goal setting systems. There's intrinsically motivated goals and extrinsically motivated goals. An extrinsic goal is what you're talking about here. It is the end result of work. There's no fuel there, right? You have motivation in the beginning, but you don't have a discipline that you can apply to that outcome. You're going to have a really hard time doing that if you can't be disciplined around it. So you have to have a set of intrinsic goals, and those are the little milestones along the way that give purpose towards the end result. I'll give you the most basic example. Somebody comes to you and says, I want to lose 50 pounds. I say, great. When do you want to lose that? Because I need to understand their time frame. I want to make sure they're working in the reality and they say, oh, I want to lose it in 60 months or 6 months. Okay, 6 months for 50 pounds is pretty aggressive. The average female loses about 1 to 1.25 pounds a week if they're really dialed in. And the average male can lose 1.5 to maybe 2 pounds per week safely if they're really dialed in. When I say really dialed in, I mean no mistakes. Most people aren't willing to do that. Let's be very frank, right? But let's just pretend somebody comes to me and they are highly motivated at the moment to lose 50 pounds in 6 months. Well, I'm going to leverage that motivation. You better believe that as a coach, knowing that I have got to get that person disciplined as soon as possible because then they're going to tank. So if we can take away the extrinsic motivation for a goal and replace it with an intrinsic value that's associated to an outcome that has something that's fulfilling to you, now you're winning. So for you, what I would do if you came to me, I'd say, all right, well, let's talk about this. What are the major muscle groups and what are the adaptations that you need from a strength and endurance standpoint, a agility or plyometric standpoint, in order to kick everyone's butt in that lightsaber battle, or for you to be able to run with all your airsoft gear and be able to be unwinded and take aim and be able to effectively perform whatever function you are on your team or whatever game you're playing in airsoft. I used to play airsoft for a long time. I'm a big airsoft guy too. And how can we take the elements of what you enjoy and incorporate it directly into your training algorithm? And what I do is I get people to stop thinking about you're not working out, you're training. You're not working out, you're training for something. And in that training protocol, we will have milestones that are intrinsically based so that you're getting this feeling of satisfaction more consistently instead of getting this like big rush because you just had a friend that told you she lost 50 pounds or whatever it is, and now you want to do it. Dude, there's nothing there. You have no juice. You're going to fail every single time. Nobody who has an extrinsic goal really is long-term successful. Fad dieting and crash dieting is a perfect example of that. We can give examples, but I'll come back to this whole idea of training with purpose brings joy and it delivers outcome into your life. I do this with people in anything. So all of our coaches, this is the primary thing we ask. What do you do as a hobby? What do you do recreationally? Is it golfing? What sports do you play, right? So golf, is it we have clients, okay, here's another interesting thing. It doesn't even have to be necessarily high physical output. I'll use one of my clients as an example. She built doll houses of all things. And when I say doll houses, I'm not talking about like what a 5-year-old makes with a gingerbread kit. I'm talking about she makes extravagant dollhouses beautifully. She's quite the craftswoman. And she has all kinds of compensation problems, right? So she has a jutting head, shoulders that roll forward. She's always hunched over a microscope, not microscope, but a
Mhm.
magnifying glass. She's got tweezers and she's like this all day long. She's just hunched into herself. And so she started getting thoracic rounding, which is when your head juts and you get developing a hump on the back of your head. She started having protracted shoulders and where her humerus internally rotated, causing her chest to tighten. She was getting all kinds of neck pains. Then all of a sudden, it started moving down the kinetic chain. Typically goes up, but this time it went down. It moved down into her low back. She started getting sciatic pain. So, in order for her to get the most fulfillment and joy from her hobby, we started training her through a corrective exercise strategy and trained her body to have better posture. We changed the where she sat. We actually looked at how she had her workshop set up. That's how far we go with our clients. We do that too with clients. I have a client, I love her to death. She's a sculpting artist and she sculpts figurines for like Dungeons and Dragons and all that stuff. She has constant problems in her arms, and especially her sculpting arm and in her hips. So, what do? We actually train her to be able to not have so many compensations in her movement pattern and reduce the chances of overuse or repetitive use injuries. That's what I would do for you. If you said, "Hey, I want to be able to wield a double-ended lightsaber, but it's just too much," we would start training for it, and that means that you'd be in the gym training and not working out.
Wow, that's huge. As you're describing that, it did remind me of it's just because you mentioned golfing, just the difference between going onto the driving range is one thing, and you get valuable experience there, but you also that's it doesn't replace going out onto the field. But then it also ties into. It was funny. I remember Robin Williams's comedy routine back in the day, where he just talked about
Yeah,
how Tiger Woods was such a disruptor because before then it was all just like fat people in their 50s, and then he shows up basically like
fit.
you would expect him out of a kung fu film or something like that, and just the
Yep.
idea of really transforming the importance of physical fitness and how that clearly improved his game, and so that's something that I put together. But I mean, I don't have a follow up to it. That was just that's really helped to contextualize like yeah, people are going to the gym to train. It's because we have interests, we have things that we want to do, and so not everything is as clear cut as whacking my girlfriend's lightsaber, but the things that we can do in support of that do improve that in long term. So the one question that I told you that I was going to ask you earlier that we've definitely talked around quite a bit, and I just want to make sure that it's asked formally. Is so for the 90-day transformation, what is the reasoning for 90 days? What is the evidence that supports why that particular time frame is beneficial, considering that people have different personalities and different hangups and environmental factors?
It's actually quite simple. It's because people are not going to be interested if there's not a definitive time frame. So I had to think about it. I had to be really, really careful. And I had to objectively look about, what does it really take to change your behavior and your habit? How long does it really take to set the roots deep in that. It's not 20 days, not 30 days, I'll tell you that. It's not 60. And frankly, it's not 90 either. I write this, it's right in the very beginning of the book on how to, there's a chapter called How to Use This Book. And I write explicitly that the 90 days are just the framework and the foundation, the launch pad, and the rest of your life is the test. But in 90 days, you should have been able to identify behaviors that you just absolutely have to get rid of, replace those behaviors with positivity or a positive outcome behaviors, and you have to be able to test them. You can't test it in 30 days as effectively as you can in 90, but you don't want to go to 6 months either, because then maybe you're leaving things on the table. So I thought, well, what the hell do I do here? Because I don't want it to be a gimmick or a trick or in a promise of 90 days. It's not. It's just that you should, if you follow, if you follow the protocol, you should have the foundation for change. And 90 days is digestible. People can bite on that. You say, here is a 50-year habit change protocol. Nobody's going to do that. 50 years, and if you do 30 days, you're going to get the wrong people doing it. Does that make sense to you? Because I don't like the extremes in general. So if you get some, you lose credibility if you tell somebody they're going to change their habits in 30 days. It's not true. But if you say, hey, in 90 days, you should have the framework and the foundation to make and affect real change in your life, well, that's totally reasonable. And people say, you know what, I could do that for 90 days. I could try to stop behavior X for 90 days. And then that's how it came about.
Mm-hmm. And just one thing that I wanted to add on top of that, from being here in Ontario and in Canada, is just the fact that after 90 days, we do have seasonal changes. So in 90 days from now, the weather is going to be bright and sunny. And so it's a long enough period of time that there are tangible visual differences that that I would see myself in a different place anyways, because my living habits would change at that point. I don't have to be indoors. We can go,
Mm-hmm.
and even if we do go outdoors, we do different things during the winter, during the spring season versus during the summer. So
Yeah, absolutely.
it's yeah. So we do have to start wrapping this up. There was one other thing that I just wanted to say that tied into what we discussed in the early part of the episode, because you just mentioned about the importance of community and communal living. And two things. One, I'm saying just because it's funny to me, because like a couple of my friends online, we were just talking about like our zombie outbreak plans. And when I pointed out is that like at the beginning of every zombie outbreak, the first thing that people say is, where do we meet? Because
Mm-hmm.
what draws people into the zombie culture, aside from the catharsis of being able to hit something over the head with a bat and for the most part not feel bad about it, is that it accelerates community living. It accelerates our need to once again bond with the people around us, rather than try to curate our lifestyle by just going online and just like picking and choosing whatever the internet has to offer.
It's spectatorship. That's what people do
Sectorship.
now. They're spectating other people's lives. It's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out too, because I'm listening to the PBD podcast yesterday, they just mentioned how like if you go to the Philippines, they don't make a lot of money, they don't have the best lived experience, but they are happy people. And having lived in Little Manila in Toronto when I was renting the apartment, I got to see a little bit of Filipino culture up front. And if you order food at a Filipino restaurant, they serve you in family portions. They'll
Mm-hmm.
serve you a dish and then they'll give everybody paper plates so that we can all scoop from the same plate. So you don't order something for yourself individually to take a photo of it and post on Instagram. You're ordering something for everyone to eat. Their emphasis on family living is the reason why it's got to be one reason why they're so happy. Maybe their weather is nice too. I don't know. I haven't been, but they're just a happy people, and I see that in the work that they do, because I've worked with a lot of people from the Philippines over the course of my 10 years working in media, and so I think that's a huge part of it too. Is not just making these choices for ourselves, but also making choices for the people who depend on us and who trust us and who love us and are concerned for our well-being as well.
I don't disagree with that. I think that the the definition of community is going to be changing, and it has been for a while. I think the smartphone fundamentally changed that in conjunction with social media platforms. I think it redefined what community could or should be. But I think that there has been some unintended consequences to that. I think there's a disassociation. I think that people now have what I call a false brevity. Like they're brave when they're behind a keyboard, but not so brave when they're in public.
Mhm.
I think it's given really stupid people a platform to say really stupid things, and other stupid people listen. Uh, and it does other things too. There's a lot of positivity that comes out of it. I do not particularly like social media, as I mentioned earlier. It is probably one of the things that I'm the most proud of with my company. We grew to the size that we are on the back of my reputation, and that's it. And then I started hiring really good coaches, and then their reputation added to mine. We have our own little community, and they're great. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better team. They're incredible people, incredible coaches. I think that we have to start looking at community as those that are really around us. I don't know if digital communities are necessarily going to have the same impact long term. I think they may momentarily influence, and that's why I think social media people who have a large following are called influencers. But I immediately question, what are they influencing you towards, and who are they influencing? So I have a lot more questions about the online community than I have answers. I'll be frank about that. But I built Forge without social media. Up until recently, we almost had no social media at all. We've just started really fostering and cultivating the social media. And the reason we're doing it is because I this is important. Let me make one note. In our pursuit of excellence towards our personal well-being, that means our bodies and our minds, our performance, our relationships, all of these things really matter and they coalesce to create the individual, right? That's what makes us us. I had never found a lot of utility in social media because I didn't particularly think that it was helpful at the time. But as I've been looking at what social media could do with my message and the message of my team, I had to step back and remove my own bias and be less obstinate about it. Because at the time it was just like, I don't want to have to deal with all this influencer crap. I don't want to have to like get followers. I think it's so dumb. I had all of these negative thoughts around social media. And what I've decided to do is embrace it, but use it the way that I would use it. So I'm not going to use it the way other people do. Now, does that mean that I'm necessarily going to be successful in my social media endeavors? I don't know the answer to that question, but I will tell you this. You want to know what separates Forge from every other online fitness company? Authenticity. You're going to get an authentic person. I'm going to be honest. And sometimes the truth really freaking hurts. And guess what? I have to look in the mirror and I have to say that to myself. It's like, Michael, it's time to start doing some social media. You want to know what's crazy about this whole experience
Mhm.
since I've really started pouring on social media the last 2 weeks, ironically, since we're having this conversation? Uh, our Instagram following has it's growing every single day, and I'm not doing anything other than posting videos. This just 90-second reels, just a quick note about something that I've been thinking about. And half of them I'm in a gym or like because I travel a lot. Like right now I'm in a hotel. I've found that I'm starting to like get a weird community sensation that's filtering back into the our in app, our in-house app. So a lot of our clients look at our social media, but now I'm starting to notice that in our community forum within the app itself, they're starting to share my reels and they're starting to talk about, have you guys checked out what Michael's putting? And no, half of these clients don't know me. I don't, these are, I hate to say it, but Forge is big enough where I probably don't know 95% of our clients. I mean, I know their name, I know who they're attached to, but I don't know them. Meaning their coach, I know what coach they're attached to. But what I've been really enjoying is clients or that work with one of our coaches suddenly messaging me and saying on Instagram saying, "Thank you so much. This was really great. This is in line with what my coach said at Forge, and this makes sense." And so what it's doing is I'm noticing it's creating continuity. And isn't that what a community
Mhm.
is? Right? It's a group of people working together towards some kind of an outcome, right? You're building a community. That's why I call community building, community organization. So I think that in our pursuit of becoming better, being objective and not being obstinate is good, but also I took accountability. Forge needs a better social media following. I take accountability. That's my problem. I'll fix it, you know? So stuff like that I think is really interesting. And like I said, I look at these things and I pursue joy and I look for ways to be as well as I can. And it makes it so that I don't I don't go to work. I don't have a job. I have an opportunity to work with amazing people and I get to. I don't have to. I get to. I'm honored to work with people and help them literally fundamentally change their lives to whatever degree I can. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. That's just the nature of coaching in general. But I think what it all comes down to is fostering a better community and of like-minded folks that are inclusive to those who aren't like-minded, right? So that's the thing. There are in the fitness or the dietetics world, right? On this end, you've got the carnivore diet. Now that's getting really super popular. And guess who you got over here?
Vegans.
You got the very
Yeah.
loud vegans, right? So you've got these huge opposing groups. And I find that to be a terrible thing for our industry. And I'm hoping that I can create an environment of community where a carnivore diet eater can work with or be at least have a conversation with a vegan. The problem is we now have what I call false forced morality. People are so arrogant and narcissistic now that they think that their way is the only way. And it's like I've never seen before. And I've been around for what, 45 years old. And I've only been really noticing it the last 3 or 4 years, like you said earlier in the podcast, in this episode, is everything is so divided, everything polarized is so bad. Well, it's in the fitness industry, it's in the nutrition industry. You can't, I write about this in my book. You get more people arguing. Like, I bet there would be less contention in a an extreme political debate between left and right than somebody who's vegan versus a carnivore because they're going to fight based on morality, but it's all fake. It's all made up, right? As I always say, so lions shouldn't eat, right? And what about bears? Bears are omnivores, right? So we start getting into the semantics of this stuff. And I just want all that crap to go away. And that's why I was always kind of rejecting social media. But now I'm seeing an opportunity to create an inclusive community where we educate, we give platform for people to say, hey, these are my preferences as it relates to my dietary intake and my training algorithms. And then we make those accommodations. And that's something that a lot of people aren't willing to do because most trainers are dogmatic. They already have like, oh, I'm a keto person. I don't know why I use an Australian accent. I think it's because so many Australian influencers are like keto. But I just think that it's really kind of a fascinating concept that you brought up is trying to foster a little bit better community and I think that that's what we kind of have done and I think that's how we've been successful and I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do with more of this social
Mhm.
media stuff. So that was my piece on there.
What inspired me to do podcasting about, um, well, closer to 13, 14 years at this point. The first podcast that I had really gotten into was a video game podcast. It's still around, called IGN Game Scoop, although it's kind of changed over time, and as such, my interest in it waned. But aside from them sharing news in the games industry, which was a justification to create it, they also had a camaraderie. There were in jokes,
Yeah,
and you got to hear some of those in jokes begin. And what inspired me wasn't being part of the community of like fans who support the work. It was seeing a window into their community and being
fun.
inspired by the world that they had created and they had shared in. And in that way it had a lot of the same emotional investment that I might get out of watching a TV show where I am well, I wasn't a fan of Friends, but I think that's a fair example of a community of people who interact with one another. So I I think that there should be a pathway for people who don't want to get more involved or don't want to become more more deeply rooted in can just kind of enjoy that the more casual fandom. But for people who
Yeah,
do see an opportunity to provide value in their own way, I think a pathway into a true rooted community is what social media I think does well. Now, I myself, I just wanted to say too, because I know we got to wrap this up, but I just wanted to say too, I did not like social media for the longest time either. But I kind of did the same thing that you said, which is if I'm going to use these platforms, I'm going to use it the way I want to. If I get
that's
kicked
right.
off the platform, I'll find an alternative. If I get shadow banned, I would rather get shadow banned for what I want to do rather than curtailed to the algorithm and curtailed to the highly sensitive people, because then you've just become a slave to them at that point, and now you are just constantly forced to placate people who are now deciding whether or not you get to eat dinner. And so every so often you get people who have, it's like literally their only way to make a living. Like, good luck, but it's a rare exception for that. So I didn't want to go too far into that, but I wanted to at least share with you that like you, like social media took some warming up to,
Yeah.
I do use TikTok now. I specifically just make my comedy videos on it so I can get my sketch writing itch scratched.
Oh,
But I really would like to see a mitosis in the short format, because right now YouTube is doing shorts, Facebook is doing shorts, Instagram has reels, and of course TikTok is kind of the leader of the pack. But no one is really curating their content. The content is all decided by the creators. What I really think we need are platforms that are specific to certain niches, like a tech-driven one or a health and fitness-driven one. So at least that way, I have some expectation for what content I'm going to get. Because right now, TikTok is very shuffled and random and chaotic, and so I'll be like, oh, I wasn't in the mood for a food recipe. I'll bookmark that for later. I'm sure I'll cook it later. 100 bookmarks later. I haven't cooked a damn thing, but at least like I want to go in with my investment first, and then I think it would have a little bit of a better path to draw people into more involvement. So that's the last thing I'm going to say about that. What I want to say now is thank you. This is the kind of episode that reminds me why I got into podcasting, so that I can feel like a different person by the end of it. So I really am grateful to have shared in your time and expertise. If you would like to floor once more, in case there's any other points or responses or reactions you just want to get out of your system before we wrap up for today, feel free, and then let the audience know how they can find you online.
I think my closing statement could be very brief and positive. I want to say something uplifting, which is if you're struggling, you know, you're not alone. Everybody does. Everybody has problems and issues and things that they think are roadblocks, barriers towards success. And you're right. You do. We all do. And I encourage you to change your mindset and find solutions to overcoming your challenges. Because when you do that, you're going to be better equipped to overcome the next challenge that is inevitable. It's coming, it's going to happen. You don't escape it. You have to train yourself, resolve yourself. The more that you focus in on becoming the best person that you can be for yourself first, not selfishly, this is narcissism. This is about personal self-discipline. You will be so well equipped to excel in your career, to be the best partner, husband, wife, whatever it is in your family, and your children will benefit. Everybody in your sphere of influence benefits from your efforts toward becoming the best person that you can be. I know it's hard. Don't give up. Continue to fight for being the best that you can. We live in a time where we have an opportunity to do that we've never had ever in history, as far as I know. And at the end of the day, just remember that while the ownership is on you, you're not alone. There are people who care. There are communities. You probably have people in your life that are there to edify and uplift you. And whether that be in your church, your community, your family, your friend group, uh, latch onto those things and bring that joy and become the person that you want to be, because you get to decide. You're so lucky to live in the United States of America if you're listening in the US. I mean, come on, you got really nothing standing in your way. You can make something up, but you don't. So please don't give up. You can become better. You can lose body fat. You can be as fit as you want, but don't make that your primary objective. Become well. Be faster, be stronger, have endurance, be agile, have the mobility and flexibility for a longevity, be 80 years old and not in a wheelchair, right? So I just hope that that gives you a little bit of a positive boost. Use that motivation if you got some, leverage it into behavior. Don't let that emotion be wasted. Take it, run with it, and put it to good use. Finally, if you want to get a hold of me, the website is forgept.com. Our company's name is Forge Fitness and Nutrition Coaching. We have been so blessed and so fortunate to work with so many people. And if you are struggling, check us out. Also, our handles across all platforms, it's of course at Forge Fit Coach. That's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, or
Mm.
X. All of those platforms are the same. Please follow on Instagram. I promise I'm putting a lot of content now. You're going to hear a lot more of me. And that's what people have been asking for. And I'm putting my obstinance aside. I'm going to do it.
Okay,
So
fantastic. Well,
there you go.
for me, the luck it is fortunate for me that I get an opportunity to review the material. It gives me a second chance to pick up on stuff that as I'm conducting the conversation, managing it, that I don't quite get to pick up on. But the thing that really sticks out to me is the improvement to self-esteem, is the willingness to win that first battle against the side of you that has been winning for a long time. It is the first opportunity to get, and so that for me is what I'm taking with me at the end of this recording. So with that, it is time to wrap this up. I've been Joseph. This has been the Impactful Coaching Podcast. And what else can I say that I haven't said 100 times? Thank you to my guest, Michael, for being on the program. Thank you to all of you for listening. And thank you for those of you who reach out and give me some feedback. It is Joseph at impactfulcoachingpodcast.com. That's JOSEPH. The rest of it is spelled the way you expect. So in whatever way that you endeavor to help others, we want you to be impactful while you're at it.